And we're finishing up talking about our differences based upon our personalities, our differences based upon being male and female, and then also our differences based upon choices. Sometimes the choices that we make in life, and sometimes the choices that are made for us in life by other people. And so we talked about the cultural differences that we face. We talk about childhood experiences and especially traumatic experiences that we go through, life-changing events like a death in the family, a lot of moves, having to move, especially military families, you know what that's like, a divorce, especially, again, your parents, financial difficulties and challenges, sicknesses, somebody that's been through a major illness in their own life at some time in the past that changes them. And it affects them even today, even if they've been healed from that. Or a sickness of a family member, having to watch them deteriorate and go through that. Catastrophes that, like the people have gone through the recent hurricanes or fires. Those things affect you for life. And all of these change a person and become a part of who they are. And then there's spiritual differences as well. We didn't get into that last week, I believe. And a religious background. When you're looking for, if you're single and you're looking for somebody, you want to, the best choice is somebody who's in the same religious background you are, that was maybe raised in a Christian home if you were. Doesn't mean it can't work out otherwise, but that creates another set of problems. When somebody's raised in a Christian home, they've got one set of criteria. When somebody's raised in a non-Christian home, it's a different set. And even if they get saved later in life, they still weren't raised with that. And so the religious background, especially if they're not of the same beliefs you are, when I talk to the singles and the teens about looking for the right partner for their life, I always tell them that there's three lists they ought to have: the unchangeable list, the important list, and then the not necessary but nice list. And on the unchangeable, I believe, is if you're a Christian, you ought to be looking for a Christian, and you ought not only be looking for a Christian, but somebody that is of the same caliber as you are as a Christian. If they only want to go to church once a week and you want to go to church 3 times a week, that's going to cause challenges. That's going to cause problems later on in the marriage. And so you want to make sure that you are walking together. You're not necessarily going to agree on every detail, and you may have had some different teaching growing up or different experiences in your church, but you do want to have that same religious walk. And if you are coming from 2 different backgrounds, that's going to affect you in your relationship, and it's going to be a challenge. And it's even a challenge when somebody gets saved later in life. So maybe you marry a person that's not a Christian, and then they become a Christian. That changes things as well. And so all of these affect our relationship, and we can't just ignore them. We can't just let them just slip off the side, because there are major areas that cause divorce. Financial is one of those. Communication is another one. Sexual problems is another one. And another one is religious differences. And these do affect, especially once you have children, and how we're going to raise our children as well. And so we want to look at the religious background and talk about our differences and deal with them as a married couple. And then also our commitment and dedication to the Lord. If one is saying, I want to be in church faithfully, the other one doesn't. If one is saying, I want to live for the Lord, the other one doesn't. One say, I want to tithe, the other one doesn't. That's another area of conflict that's going to come in. And those are choices that you have to work through and really respect each other, but to deal with from a commitment point of view. And then I think another area is our spiritual gifts. We're not going to talk about them in detail, but I believe that when somebody gets saved, the Bible says that God gives them, when they get saved, not only do they receive the Holy Spirit, but He gives them a gift or gifts of the Spirit. It might be the gift of ministry, serving. It might be the gift of giving. It might be the gift of teaching. It might be the gift of mercy. And your gift changes who you are. It affects who you are as well. If you have the gift of serving, then you want to serve others. And if your spouse is not a servant, that can create problems. If you have the gift of mercy and they don't, or if you have the gift of giving and they don't. And there's 2 times God says don't be stupid in the Bible. One of them is about salvation. Don't be ignorant of salvation. And He also says don't be ignorant of your spiritual gifts. And if you don't know what your gift is, and I have found most Christians, not only they don't know what their gift is, but they don't even know what the gifts of Spirit are. You need to do a study on that. And if you would like, I've got a study that I've done, and I'd be glad to give you a copy of, so that you can go through that study and learn more about your gifts. But I believe your spiritual gift also changes who you are, and it becomes part of your relationship as well. And so all of these differences create contrasts. And what happens is the differences create conflict in our life. And so we have to learn how to shift it just a little bit. I've said this before, but my wife and I are so different. The only thing we have in common is that we're married on the same day. And there's a lot of truth to that. We have very little in common when we get married except for our marriage relationship. And we have to find how to bring those differences together and to create strength. So number A there is find strength in your differences. Find strength in your differences. Genesis chapter 2 and verse number 24. Genesis chapter 2 and verse number 24. The Bible says, therefore shall a man leave his father and mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Now, how many have ever done a lot of work with wood? How many have ever built things out of wood very much at all? All right, some of you have. And if you've done that, one of the things you find is if you take two pieces of wood and glue them together like this, maybe making a box or a drawer or something like that, and you glue them together, there's not a lot of strength there. They can very easily be pulled apart. But if you will take and dovetail them, cut little grooves in there so they can fit together like this, then there's strength in that joining of the two pieces together. And that's what we need to understand is the strength that we have is finding how we can just shift our relationship a little bit, and the things that are causing right now the conflict, to shift them a little bit and to create strength as we cleave together. The word cleave means to glue together. And so as we glue our lives together, we want strength there by shifting just a little bit to develop and build those strengths in our relationship. Go over to Matthew chapter 19. Matthew chapter 19 and verse number 5. Matthew chapter 19 and verse number 5. And said, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. And again, it uses that same word, to cleave, to be glued together. And so we want to create the strength in our relationship by just doing a slight shift in how we respond to one another and how we deal with these differences that we have. And it goes on in Mark chapter 10 and says basically the same thing. Go over to Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5 and look at verse number 3. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse number 3. Verse number 31, verse 31. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. Again, that word joined carries the idea of this rather than this. Too many of us in our relationship, we're just kind of glued together, and that's why we break so easily, and we need to be joined together and cleave to one another. We are, number one there, we are attracted subconsciously by the other person's strengths that correspond to our weaknesses. The very reason that you fell in love with that person you're married to is the very reason that you get so upset with them today. It's the very things that are our weaknesses. That's why many times you'll find a lion and a retriever that come together in marriage, because the lion likes having the retriever partner because they just think they know everything and they just say yes to everything and they're just in agreement all the time. And the retriever likes having the lion because the lion makes all the decisions and takes the leadership. And that's great when you're dating, but it's not so great when you're mating. And then it becomes a problem later on. And that's what we subconsciously are attracted to the opposite of what we are. Somebody once said that opposites attract or attack. Opposites attract or attack. And that's what happens. The very things that attract us to our spouse are the very things that we end up attacking in our spouse and we get the maddest about. What is cute in courtship is killing in marriage. What is cute in courtship is killing in marriage. And so the very things that you found so cute about your spouse are the very things that are killing your relationship today. And then number 3, our natural strengths can easily expose another's natural weaknesses. The things that I'm strongest in, they expose my wife's weaknesses. And that becomes almost a threat to her, and that's many times why she reacts to it, or vice versa, I react to her. I'm the otter. I'm not a detailed person. And so when she starts getting too detailed and when she starts talking to me about those things, and it's like she's accusing me, you don't pay attention to details. It's almost like an accusation because that's my weakness. And I become defensive because I feel like rather than trying to help me in my weakness, I feel like it's an attack on my weaknesses. And so that's where a lot of the problem comes into our relationship, and we have to change that. Now, what are you going to do with this information is the key. So you've got a lot of information over these last couple of weeks about our differences, but it's not going to make any difference in your life unless you do something with it. And so the real key is what you're going to do with what you've learned over these last couple of weeks about your differences. And you can either, first of all, find excuses. See, some of you, you're going to use this information now to excuse yourself. Well, I'm an otter, and that's just the way otters are, so live with it. And we're going to excuse our weaknesses because that's who I am. I'm a man, and that's the way men are. Pastor said men act like that, so I'm just going to act like that. I've got this thing that happened to me when I was growing up, and it was really traumatic, and so that just makes me like I am, and you're going to have to live with that. No, don't use this to make excuses. What you need to do is look at the weaknesses of your personality and say, well, I'm going to strengthen those. That's the areas I need to work harder at. Now, what you're going to find is the harder you work, it's almost like the worse it gets. One of my weakest areas is the area of administration and organization. And I really work hard at that. And it just seems like the more I work at being organized, the bigger mess everything becomes. And it's just, I think I've got it all organized now. And I go to look for something. It's the one thing I didn't organize, that I need right now. And I struggle with this. But if I stop struggling with it, it's going to get a lot worse. And so I need to identify the weaknesses of my personality and instead of excusing myself, say that's what I've got to work at. Same thing as male and female. I don't connect with the emotional side. So I've got to work hard at connecting with that. I've got to work harder at things that I'm not naturally as a man good at. And my wife's got to work harder that she's not naturally as a woman good at. And then the experiences of life, we can use it. I could go through life saying, well, my dad beat me when I was a kid. And I could let it just affect me and use it as my excuse. And you've seen people like that. You've all seen people like that use some experience in the past as an excuse for bad behavior today. And you cannot do that. So you cannot excuse yourself. What you need to do is realize these are my strengths. So play to your strengths. And these are my weaknesses, and that's why God gave me my spouse to help strengthen those weaknesses, so I need her to be a help to me in that area. So the first thing you can do is you can make excuses. The second thing you can do with it is you can accuse. You can either excuse or you can accuse. Oh, there you go, act like a lion again, roaring all over the house, telling everybody what to do. And you can start accusing the other person. Yeah, just like a man. Man never stops to think about it before he does it, And that's what Pastor said. You're just acting like a man. Well, what is he? He's a man. He's a lion. Don't use it as an accusation. And so don't use it to beat your spouse up. Accept that this is who they are. And together you can work at helping them to overcome those things. And you need to look at it. So if you're an otter, one of your tendencies is to always say later and to put everything off and to procrastinate everything. And as an otter, what you've got to do is say, well, that's my weakness. So I've got to work harder at this. And sit down with your wife or your husband and say, now how are we going to, so when I say later, what does that mean? See, a lot of wives get, if they're married to an otter or vice versa, when their spouse says later, they know what that means is never going to happen. And so they get mad. Right away, they're mad because they've already anticipated it's never going to be dealt with because that's the experience they've had over and over again. So if you, as an otter, say, I don't want to deal with this right now, then you have to define later. Later is going to be 24 hours. Later is going to be. I know one couple, what they did is they had a little knickknack. I don't remember what it was they got. They got something that was kind of significant. They had a little knickknack. And whenever there was a problem, because especially as an otter, I think he was an otter retriever actually, and so he didn't want to deal with problems most of the time, and he always wanted to kind of put it off. And she was the lion beaver, and she always wanted to deal with it right now. And so they finally said, okay, when we have a problem, if I say later, we're going to take the knickknack and we're going to put it over here. And within 24 hours, we have to deal with that problem. As long as that knickknack's in there, just telling everybody we got a problem to deal with that we haven't dealt with yet. And until it's dealt with. And that worked for them. And so that was what was effective. But you've got to accept that. I had another couple that he was a lion, and so he would get upset and mad when they were having an argument, and so he just wanted to go take a walk and walk it off. But whenever he tried to do that, she wouldn't let him leave the house. And it just caused more problems. And so they had to learn how to deal with it. So the agreement was you can go for your walk, but you've got a limit on how long you can go for, and you've got to be back. Because she was afraid he'd walk out and not come back because she was a retriever. So you've got to find a way to work this out, but don't accuse each other, work together. And that's the third word there, and that is you can use this information. You can use it. See, use this information to help you to understand yourself, to help you understand your spouse, and to help you talk about how can we then work together, join together to resolve these problems and work through them. And I thought of this after I gave you your notes there, but there's another word you could put in there, and that's abuse. You can abuse this whole lesson, and don't do that. Use it and use it wisely to make yourself a better whatever you are. Don't stop being a lion, otter, retriever, or beaver. No, when I'm dealing with couples sometimes, usually when I get the calls, it's after there's already a big problem. And many times I've gotten a call from a husband that says, my wife is leaving me, and probably because he's married to a retriever that finally gave up on him and is now done, and she's walking out the door. And I tell this husband, I said, you're going to have to make some changes. But one of the things you don't want to do, sometimes a husband at that point will start begging his wife and groveling and stuff. And she doesn't want you to stop being a man. That's not going to fix it because she wants to be married to a man. But just not a man that abuses her. Not a man that dominates or stuff like that. So there's a difference between the two. You don't want to stop. I don't want my wife to stop being a woman. She doesn't want me to stop being a man. But I want to be a spirit-controlled man. I want her to be a spirit-controlled woman. She doesn't want me. She married a otter lion. I married a beaver retriever. That's what I fell in love with, and that's what I want. But I just want a spirit-controlled one. And I understand there are certain problems that I inherited before I even ever met her. And we together have to learn how to work through those problems and resolve them so that we can have a better relationship. And so use this information to make for a better relationship as a couple. All right, let's go to the next lesson there, next page and the new notes there. We're going to talk about communication. This is a lesson on communication. And in this lesson, we're going to first of all talk about building a word picture. So how do I learn to communicate with the animal that my husband or wife is? How do I learn to communicate with the man or a woman? How do I learn to communicate with this person that's so different from me? Well, one of the things you can do is build a word picture. So first of all, you need to learn their love language. You need to learn their love language. Go over to 1 Corinthians chapter 14. 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and verses 9 through 11. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, beginning with verse number 9, the Bible says, so likewise ye, except ye utter by the tongue words easy to be understood, how shall be known what is spoken, for you shall speak into the air. There are, it may be, so many kinds of voices in the world, and none of them is without signification. Therefore, if I know not the meaning of the voice, I shall be unto him that speaketh a barbarian. He that speaketh shall be a barbarian unto me. Now, we have many different nationalities in our church. And some of you, English is a second language. And I barely speak English, and I am not good with other languages. I've been working with Filipinos for over 30 years, and I still have learned nothing beyond mabuhay, lumpia, and pancit. And that's about the extent of my vocabulary. And I've tried. You can ask the Dela Cruzes. When I've been over there in the Philippines, the first time especially, I wanted to say something in I think it was Ilocano or Tagalog. I wanted to say it in my sermon I was going to preach. And how many times did I go to you, Marissa? I must have come to you about 30 times asking you to say it this way. And she would tell me how to say it, and I'd repeat it. And then I'd go away, and I'd come back, and I'd say it wrong again. She'd correct me, and I'd go away. And then when I finally got up there, I still messed it up. Because I'm not good with languages. And so if you were to start talking to me in another language, you could say wonderful things about me, and I would sit there and kind of look at you. I'd have no idea. You could say, you're the best pastor I've ever had. You're the nicest guy I've ever met. You're a wonderful Christian. You could say all these nice things about me, and I would not understand a word. It wouldn't benefit me. And so the same thing is true with love. The problem in many relationships is we are speaking a different language than our spouse. How many have ever read the book, The 5 Love Languages? Raise your hand. Okay? If you've not read it, that's one of the seminal books. That's a book that can really change your relationship. And I would encourage you to get a copy. I believe we've got some in our bookstore. And you go online and get them pretty cheap as a used book or as a new book as well. And you can get it Kindle or you can get it as an audio book. I would really encourage you both. It's an easy book to read, and it's one that will be a transforming book in your relationship if you will apply those principles. Because what you have to do is learn how to say I love you in the other person's language. Now, how many of you speak a second language? Raise your hand. Okay, how many speak a second language? All right, let's kind of go through here. Say I love you in Tagalog, or what language you can do? Tagalog or dialect? What's that? All right, Ilocano. Go say it in Ilocano. How do you say I love you in Ilocano? What's that? Yeah, right. Okay, say it in Chinese. Got that? All right, Tupa's not here. What? Redneck, right? All right, what language?
I apa uya.
Okay. All right, but you see it, if I came over and said, say it in Chukese or Samoan or Korean, none of you are going to understand that. You know what? That's your spouse right now for a lot of you. You're saying it and they're not hearing it because you're not speaking their love language. And so you've got to determine what is your spouse's love language. Now, first of all, number one is words of affirmation. Words of affirmation. Go over to Proverbs chapter 18 and verse number 21. Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 21. The Bible says, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. Okay? So some people's love language is words of affirmation. They need to hear you say, I love you. They need to hear those words over and over again. It's kind of like the couple that got married, and a year later she says to him, says, you know, we've been married for a year now, and you never told me I love you. And he looked at her and said, well, I told you that when we got married, and I haven't changed my mind. Because his love language is not words, but hers, she needed to hear that again and again and again and again. They need to hear you're beautiful. You need to hear you're special. They need those words of affirmation. And they need it specifically. It's not generic, I love you. They need to hear you, I love you because you're beautiful, and what it is beautiful or handsome about you. They need to hear it very specifically. Now, if you're a lion, lions aren't necessarily good talkers. Or if that's the difficult part, but you've got to overcome that. Men only have half the words women do, but they need to hear it more often. And so the words of affirmation is some people's love language. Now, the way you can identify that is to kind of watch and pay attention. What they do is probably what they want. So if they're constantly saying things to you like I love you and constantly saying words like that of affirmation, that's probably what they need. And so you've got to figure that out. Is that their love language, is words of affirmation? And so you're going to have to learn some new words. If that's not your love language, you need to get yourself a dictionary and start learning the words that are going to say I love you to your spouse. And so we've got to work on that area. Now, the second love language is quality time together. Ephesians 5:16 says, redeeming the time because the days are evil. And this love language, I just need you to spend time with me. And so the clock represents this love language. I need your time. And the person with the love language of quality time, they don't necessarily need you to talk to them. They don't necessarily need you to do anything. They just need you there. One of my primary love languages is just to be with me. And I remember when we first started Ohana, we were in a house over in Foster Village in Salt Lake, and we got the house because it was across from the community center where we were meeting, and we had a lanai and a garage area we could have classes in as well. And I needed an office because we had little kids. It was hard to study in the house, and so we built an office out in the carport. And I would go out there and study. And I'd be out there studying, I'd get kind of antsy. And so I would go in the house, and I would walk around the house until I found where my wife was. And I didn't realize what I was doing at the time, but I was walking around, and she'd be in the kitchen doing something, or she'd be out in the backyard or whatever, and I'd just go stand there. And she'd look at me and say, "What do you want?" "Nothing." "You need anything?" "No." And I'd just stand there for a little while, then I'd go back out of the office, and I was fine. I just need to be with her. That's why I have such a tough time when she's gone, because she's not with me. And I don't know how you guys in the military do. I'm about ready to die after 5 days, and you guys go for 6 months. I really respect you with that, because I need the time. And by the way, if you're going to have to be gone, you need to find a way to kind of put yourself there. You say, "Well, how can I do that?" You got to be creative. I remember when one of our kids was at school, we got a shirt, one of my shirts, and we opened it up. It was one of my dress shirts with a long sleeve, and we wrote all over it notes to her and stuff like that. And we sent it to her as a hug. And just a creative way to put ourselves there. But the point is some people, they just need you to be there. They don't need you to touch them. They don't need you to talk to them. They want some quality time. It's not just sitting and watching a TV program together, but it is being together. As long as you're there, I feel loved. When you're not there, I don't feel loved. Okay, now the third love language is the love language of receiving gifts. Proverbs chapter 17 and verse number 8, the Bible says, "A gift is a precious stone in the eyes of him that hath it. Whithersoever it turneth, it prospereth." How many of you, one of your kids ever brought you something like a rock and handed you, said, "Here, Mommy, this is for you"? Anybody ever had that happen? Now, to them, it was a precious gift. To you, it was a rock. But it means something. Why? Because your little kid brought it to you in love. They picked a little dandelion out of the lawn and brought it to you. "Here, Mommy, here's a flower." That meant more in some cases than a whole dozen roses would mean. The person whose love language is gifts, they don't need big, expensive gifts. What they need is the little gifts, the thoughtful gifts. It's when you come home and you bought their favorite candy bar, or you got them a little knick-knack that meant something special, or you just sent them a card in the mail. I know some husbands, what they'll do is they'll buy a card, they'll write a note on it, they'll put an envelope and mail it home to their wife, and they're going home that day. They're not traveling. And the next day, she gets it while he's at work. And if their love language is gift, it's like, wow, big statement. If your kids, if that's their love language, then when you come home from the trip, they always want to see what's in your pockets because they expect you to buy something for them. They don't care if it just came from the airport gift shop. They just need you to show you love them by buying something for them. So now we got 3 love languages. Number 4, so number 3 is the gifts. So you need to get them a gift, not just on their birthday, though. If you miss their birthday, if you miss their anniversary, you miss Christmas, if your spouse's love language is gift, and they say to you, let's not buy anything for Christmas for each other this year, do not believe them. Do not listen to them. Do not fall into that trap, okay? Because it is a trap. Because they're going to want to give, and you may not, but they do. So don't get into that trap of doing that. Number 4 is acts of service. Acts of service. Go over to Galatians chapter 5 and verse number 13. Galatians chapter 5 and verse number 13. Galatians 5:13, the Bible says, "For brethren, we have been called unto liberty, only use not your liberty for an occasion of flesh, but by love serve one another." This person feels love when you do something for them. It's the guy that when you get his uniform ready for him, so he's got it all ready in the morning when he gets ready to go to work, that's an act of love. It's the wife when she goes to bed and there's dirty dishes in the sink and she gets up next morning and the sink's not dirty, that's an act of love. It's doing things for me says that you love me. Now the last one, number 5, so we got to do things for it. So I got the apron up here. And then number 5 is physical touch. Physical touch. In Luke chapter 8 and verses 43 through 48. Luke chapter 8 and beginning with verse number 43 is an interesting story. It says here in Luke 8:43, that a woman having an issue of blood 12 years, which had spent all her living upon physicians, neither could be healed of any, came behind him and touched the border of his garment, and immediately her issue of blood stanched. And Jesus said, "Who touched me?" When all denied, Peter and they that were with him said, "Master, the multitude thronged thee and pressed thee, and sayest thou, Who touched me?" And Jesus said, "Somebody hath touched me, for I perceive that virtue is gone out of me." And the woman saw that she was not hit. She came trembling, falling down before him. She declared unto for all the people for what cause she had touched him, and now how she was healed immediately. And he said unto her, "Daughter, be of good comfort. Thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace." There is virtue in touch. And there's some people that do not feel loved if you're not touching them. If you've got a child like this, they're constantly at your side. And they're always in the way. If you sit down on the couch, there's 3 other seats, they sit next to you. They scrunch up by you, scoot over, and they scoot over to you. When you're out anywhere, they want to hold hands. I mean, they don't feel loved if you don't touch them. And the same thing is true of your spouse. Now, this is primarily, it's a non-sexual physical touch. In other words, the touches are not just sexual in nature. Some women complain, the only time my husband ever touches me was he wants sex from me. And if her language is love, then she's going to reject that. It's the rubbing of the shoulders. It's the rubbing of the head. It's the soft caress. It's the holding hands, snuggling up with each other, putting your arm around each other. It's snuggling up in bed. It's just touch me. That's all I need. And if they're not touched, they don't feel love. Now, ladies, and even some women, a lot of men that have this language, and some women, the touch in sex is important to them as well, because that's where they feel the ultimate touch of your bodies together. And so that is very important in playing into that also. So we got the 5 love languages. Now, your first job is to determine what your love language is and what your spouse's love language is. And we all have all 5. My number 5 is gifts. Gifts are not a big deal to me, especially for my wife, because either for my wife or kids, I end up paying for it anyway. And they usually choose the wrong thing, and I just have to take it back, return it, and get the right thing. So just let's skip the middleman, and I'll go buy it for myself. And I'm not a big gift kind of guy. Now, I do like specific gifts, like what the Sandbacks gave me the other week with the candle that said happily ever afters, things like that. So I still like gifts, and if you want to give me money or a car or something like that, I will not get mad at you, okay? I will love you. I will love you for that. But I am not a gift person. That's not my number 1. So probably the easiest thing is to know what number 5 is. I'm not big on this. And then you kind of work your way from there. And so what is your number 1? What is your number 2? What is number 3? What is number 4? What is number 5? You need to understand that for yourself. And then you need to figure it out for your spouse. Now, you can ask them, and that's okay, or you can experiment on them. I remember when I read in one of the books I was reading about the average woman needs 13 non-sexual physical touches a day. And so I figured I'd find out how many my wife needs. And as I told you before, the reason I was doing that, because I wanted to see what was the minimum I could get by with. That's the way men tend to think. And so can I get by with less than 13? Maybe I can she only needs 5. So why waste an extra 7 touches, you know? And so I wanted to see the minimum I could get by with. And so I experimented on her to figure it out. So try it. Try spending the whole week just saying nice things to your spouse and see how they react, see if it changes. Try spending another whole week just touching them. Try spending a whole another week doing things for them. And just experiment until you find the right balance between those. Now, some are going to be hard for you because it's not your natural love language. Some of you you almost don't want to touch. It's just not a big, you don't want to hold hands all the time. You don't want somebody up next to you. You want your space. But if your spouse needs touch, you can't do that. Some of you are not talkers. But if your spouse's love language is words of affirmation, they're starving because you're not giving them what they need. And so you've got to determine what your love language is and what their love language is. And then you got to figure the balance between the two to meet each other's needs, to communicate your love to one another. See, if my wife's love language, if your wife's love language is touch, you can tell her all day long, I love you, and she's going to feel unloved because you're not touching her. But if her love language is words, you can hold hands with her and snuggle up with her every day, and she's going to feel unloved because you're not saying it. So you've got to provide that. Now, there's always exceptions to the rule, and there's factors that come into play. Personalities, male, female factors come into play with all this, and you have to kind of take that into account. Men are going to be different than women in the words of affirmation. You've also got to take into account sometimes there's something that happened. When my wife and I first got together, we met in college, we were in classes together, and then we went in one of our classes was called Vacation Bible Time and Camping. And so part of the class, as a class, we had to plan a weekend canoe trip, a Friday and Saturday canoe trip. We had to plan it, and then we went on the canoe trip. And so we planned it all out, and that was our project to do, and then we went on it. It was the biggest disaster that ever happened. Everything that go wrong went wrong. There was a drought that year, and we walked the canoes more than we rode them. And then it decided it was going to break the drought that weekend. And there was bugs everywhere because mosquitoes were terrible. And we had one girl that she got bitten by mosquitoes and was allergic, and she had to be taken to the hospital. And the ambulance that came to take her to the hospital broke down 3 times on the way to the hospital. It was just one disaster after another. But my wife and I were in the same canoe. We were not dating then, but we're in the same canoe with another girl. And she thought I liked the other girl, and I liked her, and I wanted to get to know her, and we were trying to get together. We finally got ready to go. And so we got in the van to go back. And by the way, disaster continued. That van, brand new van, threw a rod on the way back. But she got in the van first, and I was kind of in charge of the van. And so I got in there last, and I was hoping there'd be a seat next to her, and there was. And so I got on there, and I walked over to the seat, and I was going to sit down by her. And I thought things had been going pretty good. We were kind of making it, friends and everything, and making a connection. And so I went to sit down by her, and as I was sitting down by her, she said in a loud voice, because everybody was talking in the van. You know how does everybody's talking? She said, in a loud voice, she says, "Don't touch me!" And everybody looked at me like I was some kind of a sex pervert or something like that. I was going to attack her and rape her or something, because she said it so loud. Well, what happened is she got sunburned so bad. She was afraid I was going to touch the sunburn. And see, your spouse may be sunburned in that area. And maybe their love language is touch, but they've been burned too many times. And so that touch has got to be patient and careful. I said, I won't hurt you, but can I sit by you? And she said, yes, she wanted me to. But she didn't want me to hurt her. And your spouse doesn't want you to hurt her or him. And so you got to understand what their love language is. And I really challenge you to get that book, 5 Love Languages, and read it. You can also, I gave you there's a website you can go to for the love languages test, if that'll help you figure out your love language. Don't take it as gospel, but it might be one other tool to help you figure out what your love language is. And by the way, this is good for your children, because if your children are not having their love language met, when they become a teenager, there's going to be some guy or girl that's going to meet it for them. And it's better if you're doing it. You're meeting their needs and fulfilling those needs when they're growing up. All right, number B there, letter B, is learn another language. Learn another language. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and verses 17 through 19. 1 Corinthians 14, 17 through 19. For thou verily givest thanks well, but other is not edified. I thank my God, I speak with tongues more than you all, yet in the church I'd rather speak 5 words with my understanding, that by my voice I might teach others also, than 10,000 words in an unknown tongue. So we've got to learn the language that is going to speak to our spouse. And so in order to do that, number 1, we need to learn how to listen and how they listen. How they listen. People listen differently. And studies have shown, and again, this is really good for your children as well, but studies have shown there's 3 ways people listen. Number 1 is visually. They say, well, how can you listen visually with your eyes? Because some of us, the way we hear is through our eyes. Psalms talks about they had a new song in their mouth and people saw it. You can see it. I'm a visual person. That's why I like object lessons, because there's something you can see. I like pictures. When I read a book, I look at the pictures first. And sometimes that's all I look at. And I can learn a lot just from the pictures. I'm a visual person when I listen. So if your spouse is visual in their listening skills, they want eye contact. They want to see what's going on. And you can tell these people in a number of ways. There are people that tend to read more. Okay, they're going to read a lot because they're visual in their listening. They tend to write things down because they want to see it. And so they're the ones in church, they take notes. They're the ones that when they make lists all the times, that tends to be more of a visual person. They like graphs, they like pictures. They're the kind of person that's going to say things like, well, I see what you're saying. Or look at this. They need it. They're also the kind of people, generally, a lot of times, are going to talk with their hands. I used to know one girl in high school that if she didn't have her hands free, she couldn't talk. We proved that one time. One time we had some people hold her hands down, and she couldn't say 3 words in a row. She couldn't do it. She had to have her hands moving while she was talking. But they're visual. They need to see it. And they're going to want it written down. A list is good for them when you're talking to them. They're going to want to see what you're talking about. They're visually oriented in their listening skills. Secondly is auditory. People that listen with their ears. You can tell this kind of people because they tend to talk to themselves. You know, while they're doing something, and they're mumbling to themselves. They're talking to themselves because they're auditory. They need to hear it out loud as they think. They can't think without their mouth moving. They tend to move their lips when they're reading. These are people that say things like, well, that sounds good to me. Or I hear what you're saying. And so it's more from the auditory point of view. So if you're a visual person, phone doesn't work well for you because you need to see the person. When I called my wife today, or she called me, I said, let's go to FaceTime. I wanted to see her face while I was talking to her. You know, she's up in Podunk, nowhere right now where she can't get any reception. In order to talk to me, she has to go out into the baseball field and stand in the dugout in order to get reception with me. Now, she's down in the cities today, in the Twin Cities, and so she has reception. And so I wanted to visual see her because I'm a visual person. But she doesn't need to do that. It's not a big deal to her. She could talk to me, but I don't talk good on the phone because I'm not auditory in my listening skills. And then number 3 is kinesthetic, and this is where they need to touch it. They need to feel it. This is a person that they like to highlight things. They're a highlighter. So when they're reading a book, they highlight or underline. This is the kind of person that draws pictures in their notes. So look around you. If there's pictures in their notes, this is who they are, okay? Instead of they might write the words, but they're drawing pictures all the time. This is a person that needs to put their hands on, and they need a physical touch. And they get antsy if they're not having that they don't sit very long if somebody's just talking. They get kind of antsy. This is somebody that says, I sense what you're saying. You know, that feels good to me. Now, can you see problems if you're an auditory and they're a visual in the communication area? See, if your spouse is visual, then you need to get them looking at you. You need to give them something to look at. You need to make lists. Write it down so they can see it. That couple with the little knick-knack, that was good for them because one of them was visual and they could see the knick-knack as a reminder. If they're auditory, then you're going to have to choose your words carefully. They're going to read into the words you use, and they're going to read the tone and all these kind of things. So you need to understand that and deal with that. If they're kinesthetic, if they're by touch, then you need to give them something, like I use object lessons all the time. Maybe you can give them an object lesson. Again, for that couple, that object for one of them was something they could touch. And it gave them something that they could hands-on with. So understand the listening skills. And then understand how they communicate. How do they communicate? Now, first of all, as a man and woman. Men see women like a mirror. When we talk to you, what we really want is you just kind of reflect back our thoughts to us. Is really what we're looking for. So, but women see men like a window. When they talk to us, they want to see inside of us. What's your emotion? What are you feeling? What's going on? What are you thinking? So we're very, very different in how we communicate. And so it's like looking at, you ever seen one of those windows, one side is a window, the other side's a mirror? It's a one-way window. That's the way some of you are communicating. It's not going through. And so you've got to learn that. And so women, letter A, they share feelings where men share facts. We talked about that some and the difference between men and women. So you women, when you talk, you tend to talk about your feelings and how I feel about this and how I feel about that, where men tend to talk about, well, this is what, and we deal with the facts. She wants to resolve the issue. He wants to solve it. When my wife brings something to me, we'll say, well, let's do this, this, and this. But she wants to resolve it, and the way she resolves it is by talking it out. Now, again, other factors, if she's words, that's going to change it. All these other things are coming to play, her personality. But generally, there's a truth to that. So we communicate differently. So when I talk to her, I need to realize she's got to get her feelings out. She's got to be able to express that without me getting upset or without me saying, well, you shouldn't feel like that. Or if you feel like that, then do this. I can't just rush to solve it. I've got to give her some time to resolve it. But she's also got to realize if we walk away from each other and we have not solved it, I'm frustrated. So how are we going to solve it? Number B, women want to talk with you. Men want to talk at you. I'm done listening before she's done talking. Women want to play catch. Men want to play ball. You ever watch girls when they're playing catch? They kind of just toss it to each other, But you ever watch guys? When they throw the ball, it's like they're trying to knock over the other guy. I mean, it's like, wow! Girls don't. I tried playing catch with my wife one time, and I threw the ball like that, and she got mad and walked away. What are you doing? We're playing catch, right? No, you're not. You're trying to kill me. And that's the way a lot of conversations go, too. We're throwing our words at our wives, and they want to play catch. See, as men, we like to dominate the ball. As women, they want to share the ball. They don't need to control it. They want to share it back and forth. So they want to have a back and forth conversation where we want to control the ball, and when we let it go, we're going to let it go hard. And then we want it back so we can throw it again. And so we communicate differently. We need to understand that and bring that into account in how we talk to each other. Letter C, you got to learn how to talk to the animal. You've got to learn how to talk to the animal. Now, if you found the animal analogy, the personalities, the lion, the otter, the beaver, and retriever, if you found that helpful, then there's a couple books I would recommend. And these are from our library, so you can check these out or you can order them yourself. But the one book is called The Two Sides of Love. It's got two different editions here, two different covers, but same book, by Gary Smalley and John Trent. This is the book where he covers in detail the different personalities and talks about how to communicate. This is the one, the most detail on the animal personalities and how to communicate with each other, lion, otter, beaver, retriever. Okay, another book he's got is called Making Love Last Forever, and there's some chapters in there that deal with the animal personalities as well as a number of other things. This is a little broader in its perspective. And then the other one is called The Language of Love, and this talks about how to use language to communicate by drawing word pictures and talking with each other. And so I would recommend any one of these books, and I've got, these are from our library, so you can check them out. I'll put them out here in the front row, and if you want to be the first one to come up and check them out, you can, or you can go online and order them as well. And so that's a book that I would recommend. Now, when we're talking about the animals, the first thing you have to do is clearly identify which animals you both are. You're a blank. You're a primary and a secondary. You're going to have a little bit of all four, but you're going to have to narrow it down. Now, a lot of times what happens is we're wrong. And if you're wrong, it's going to make communication a little bit harder. And a lot of times we're wrong about ourselves because we haven't really thought it through. And I remember one person, one wife, she said, I'm a lion. So she said, her husband said, you're a lion. She said, no, I'm not. I'm a retriever. And he said, no, you're a lion. She said, I am not a lion. She just proved she was a lion because a retriever wouldn't do that. And you got to clearly identify what you are and what your spouse is, so you know what you're dealing with. Because if I'm going to go into a room, you ever seen one of those things where door number 1, there's a lion behind it, and door number 2, there's a beautiful girl or something behind it? If I'm going to open the door, I want to know if there's a lion in there or not. I want to know what I'm going to deal with when I go through that door. And so you need to clearly identify which animals you are. And then talk about your good and bad traits together. Sit down and have a conversation and talk about them. Now, this conversation can turn nasty real quick if you start complaining rather than complimenting. So don't say, well, you're a lion, I can tell it, because you're always bossing everybody around. You're always, don't do that. Compliment them on the things that they are, and let them identify their weaknesses. So compliment, don't complain. But when you're talking about yourself, identify the weaknesses rather than the strengths. Focus more on the weaknesses. You can talk about your strengths as well. Because I'm a lion, I'm good at making decisions, and that's why I want to be the leader of the home, and I want to make those decisions. Or I'm a retriever, and I'm not good at making decisions, and I need your help because I need to be the leader of this home. So you need to compliment, not complain, and talk about these are the good things and these are the bad things. How can we play to the good things, build on our strengths, and how can we strengthen our weaknesses? Then you need to identify your own personality weaknesses and determine to work on them. Just for yourself. This is what I'm going to work on. Don't focus on your spouse's weaknesses. Man, most of the time when I sit down with a couple and they've learned these things, yeah, he's always this and she's always that. No, focus on your weaknesses because you can't change them, but you can change you. And start working on those. And that will encourage your spouse that you've at least identified. Speak up and say, I know I'm not good at this. And so you've identified it. That's half the battle. And then the second half of the battle is now I'm going to work on this. And this is how I'm going to work on this. This is how I'm going to change this.